Starting with vulnerability assessments. A vulnerability assessment is a systematic evaluation of asset exposures. The aspects of a vulnerability assessment include asset identification, threat evaluation, vulnerability appraisal, risk assessment, and overall risk mitigation. When identifying assets, it's simply the process of inventorying items with economic value. Some common assets are people, data, hardware, and software. Next, you need to determine each item's relative value. How difficult is it to replace that asset? And then you'll use a rank or numbering scale to identify the need of protection. When performing for vulnerability assessments, remember what you're doing is threat evaluation. You're listing all known potential threat. You'll use several different techniques, such as threat modeling. The goal there is to understand attackers and their methods. It's often done by constructing scenarios. You can build an attack tree. This provides a visual representation of potential types of attacks. Some categories of threats that you need to take into account are natural disasters, espionage, extortion, human error, software attacks, threat, and so on. Here's a look at a typical attack tree, for instance, for stealing a car radio. Next, you look at your vulnerability appraisal. Determine the current weakness. It's a snapshot of the current organization's security. And then catalog each vulnerability. You'll want to perform next your risk assessment. Determine damage resulting from an attack and assess the likelihood that vulnerability is a risk to that organization. Remember, not all vulnerabilities are risk. They're two different things, and it's important for you to keep them separate in your mind. When looking at potential impact, you'll look at no impact all the way up to catastrophic impact. This is why it's important to structure them and rank them so you know which assets to expend resources to protect. While performing your vulnerability assessment, one of the calculations or numerical values that you need to determine is your single loss expectancy, or your SLE. It's the expected monetary loss each time a risk occurs. It's calculated by multiplying the asset value by its EF, or exposure factor. The exposure factor is the percentage of the asset value likely to be destroyed by a single particular risk. Next, you need to determine your ALE, or annualized loss expectancy, the expected monetary loss over a 1 year period. You'll multiply the SLE by the annualized rate of occurrence, or the ALE. The annualized rate of occurrence is the probability that the risk will occur in a particular year, whether it's 10% or 20% or 50% of the time. You'll do this by estimating the probability that the vulnerability itself will actually be realized. Once you can do that, you can then determine risk mitigation, determine what to do about the risks. Do you diminish the risk, transfer the risk, or just accept the risk?